Hi everyone, tonight we're going to discuss quantity controls, sometimes called quotas. Before we do that, let's take just a quick review of perfectly competitive market equilibrium and what happens here. So, supply and demand, point where they intersect, represents equilibrium, price, and quantity, otherwise known as market clearing price. Price ceilings, as we discussed today, government control that sets the maximum legal price that a seller can charge for a good or service. This creates a gap between the equilibrium price and the new price ceiling. And if we move the price out here and look at price line out here, we look now there is a gap between quantity supplied and quantity demanded. In the case of a price ceiling, quantity supplied is actually lower than the quantity demanded, and we get a shortage. Conversely, if there's a price floor, again, a price floor is a government control that sets the minimum legal price that a seller can charge for a good or service. It is above, if it's an effective price floor, it's above the market clearing price. And what happens as a result, looking at the demand curve and the supply curve and the points of interaction with the new price, otherwise known as the price floor? Well, in this case, quantity demanded is actually lower than the quantity supplied. Therefore, suppliers will end up with extra of whatever the product or service is, otherwise known as a surplus. Keep in mind that both price ceilings and price floors talk about government intervention on the price side. Let's talk about government intervention on the quantity side, otherwise known as a quantity control. A quantity control, otherwise known as a quota, is defined as an upper limit placed on the quantity of something that can be bought or sold. And in order for that quota to have an impact, it has to actually be a quota that's imposed below what the market clearing equilibrium price and quantity are. If a quota were set, and I won't move it here, if a quota were set above the market clearing quantity, there'd be no impact of the quota. In this case, a quota has been set below the market clearing quantity, and as a result, look at the interaction between the quota quantity and the supply and demand curves. Well, if you look here at PD, this is the demand price. This is the price that consumers are willing to pay for this good at this quantity offered. The supply price, on the other hand, is the price at which suppliers are willing to offer this quantity of the product. You then get, again, the QQ is the quota quantity. Well, let's talk about what happens in the marketplace as a result of this. Here's what happens. At this quota amount, the price paid for the product is PD. The price received, effectively received by the supplier, is P sub S. Let's talk about this in the context of taxi medallions and what happens when a quota is put in place. Well, let's take a look here. Focus up here on the chart for a minute, and then we'll talk about what's written down here. In the case of taxi medallions in New York City, and this example is straight out of the book, I think it's a very good one. While there was an equilibrium quantity of 10 million rides, the city moved this quota back and capped it at 8 million rides. Well, here's what happened. Now for a taxi fare, on average, a consumer is going to pay $6. That exceeds the market clearing price of $5 because of the movement along the demand curve where, in effect, there are people demanding more of this product than is being supplied, and we know that when that happens as a result of a price increase, you're going to see movement along the demand curve. The effective price received is an interesting idea here. Yes, the fare owner is still, the medallion owner is still collecting $6, but in effect, the price received is only $4, and here's why. There's a concept called the wedge. The wedge here, the difference between PD, so the price paid, and the price received, is something called quota rent. Quota rent is defined as the earnings that accrue to the owner of the rationed item from ownership of the right to sell the item. Okay, so what does that mean in English? Taxi medallions have market value because they're scarce resources of in excess of $775,000 for a corporate medallion and $580,000 for an individual medallion. Yes, that's for one cab medallion. So we're talking 575 effectively to $775,000 for one of those medallions. And here's what's happened to the price since 2000. So what does that have to do here with the wedge and the quota rent? Well, I had to pay for that medallion as an owner of that cab. So the price I'm receiving here, this $4, really represents the difference between the revenue that I'm generating and the investment that I had to make in that medallion. And at the end of my ownership period of that medallion, what's going to happen is I will be paid for that particular medallion, hopefully at an increased price. And that, over the course of my ownership, will make up for the difference between the $4 and $6. The other piece that was defined in the book was opportunity cost. Opportunity cost simply because I could have rented out the medallion to somebody else. I could have accrued or incurred zero costs associated with operating the taxi, wouldn't have to pay for gas, wouldn't have to pay for maintenance, and would have been able to effectively charge $2. Why would I be able to charge $2 for every fare? I'd charge that to the person to whom I rented my cab and rented my medallion, where at this quota amount and this amount of supply and demand, the person who was renting that would be happy at a $4 collected amount and would pay me the difference between the $4 and the $6, $6 being the price actually paid. A tricky concept, but important to remember here. Quota rent equals the difference between the price paid for a product and the price received for a product, otherwise called the demand price and the supply price. So what about the rides that didn't happen? Is there any societal cost to this quantity of rides that never took place? In fact, there is, and it's referred to as a deadweight loss. A deadweight loss is defined as the loss associated with transactions that don't happen, that don't take place because of an intervention in the market. In this case, the quota. The deadweight loss represents all of the rides that weren't able to be taken, and also represents all the revenue that the operators of the taxi cabs didn't collect. So, quick review here. Quotas push down the quantity available of a product, results in demand price and supply prices that are different than equilibrium price. That shift in price results in price paid and price received. In the case of the taxi medallions, consumers were paying $6, but the effective price received by the taxi medallion owner is only $4. And why is that? Well, because of the quota rent. Again, quota rent defined as the earnings that accrue to the owner of the rationed item from the ownership of the right to later sell that item. So think about the $575,000 to $775,000 value of that medallion and the cost to that cab driver over time, but the benefit knowing that eventually he or she will be able to sell it. Then again, very quickly, deadweight loss represents the loss associated with transactions that don't take place. So our loss here in the case of the medallions of 2 million rides and all of the associated benefit from those rides and the revenue lost because the medallion owners weren't able to collect all of the revenue associated with those fares. Okay, that's it. Hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you in class tomorrow.